The 1970s was a time of significant conflict in the United States and beyond. War, political corruption, and social and cultural developments combined in an atmosphere that sometimes felt as unsteady as shifting sand. Members of the church weren't immune to the tension caused by the uncertainties of the world, and the church had changes of its own to deal with as its administrative structure responded to its growing global membership.
Amid the uncertainty, though, came both the need for stability and the opportunity for adjustments for the future. In the Young Women's Organization, two general presidents approached the challenge with faith and with prayer, and, like runners in a relay race, took some now familiar programs from idea to action across both presidencies. This is Saints Volume 4, the podcast. I'm James Perry.
And I'm Lisa Christensen.
Leaders in the Church, Ardeth, Kapp, and Ruth Funk. The feminist movement in the 1960s and 1970s brought significant debate and significant change, such as allowing women to have their own credit cards and bank accounts, resources and shelters for those who experience domestic violence, and providing legal protections for women in the workplace and requiring equal pay regardless of gender. Many activists also pushed for things like more affordable daycare and elder care, as well as other measures that would help both men and women support their families and grow as parents and individuals.
But some of the discussion around the movement was contentious too. Many proponents of making women more present in places like the office and government could be critical of women who stayed home to raise their children. Others were more hostile still to families. Because the feminist movement encompassed both family-friendly measures and those that seemed like they would negatively affect families, many Latter-day Saints felt torn about what could and should happen.
It was into this cultural maelstrom that in 1972, Ruth Hardy Funk was called as General Young Women President. But even that wasn't straightforward. Along with her call came a reorganization of both youth organizations, which were combined into the Aaronic Priesthood Mutual Improvement Association. The Young Women and Young Men's leadership was new and operating in a new structure that came as part of a number of sweeping changes within the church's administration called correlation.
The changes in correlation mainly dealt with simplification, having organization leaders report to their bishops or branch presidents rather than the general presidencies in Salt Lake City. Correlation committees were also established to ensure publications from each organization and publication were consistent in their messaging and tone, especially about gospel topics. Ruth was called to work on one of the earliest of these committees.
While some changes were difficult for members, such as the 1971 closure of the popular Relief Society magazine, which had published monthly since 1914, President Harold B. Lee made the decision to make communication and gospel teachings easier and more consistent around the world. Where Relief Society, priesthood, Sunday school, primary, and seminary classes had all had their own manuals and planned their own lessons, for example, they would now coordinate lessons to help make sure members were getting similar gospel instruction across age groups and classes. Ruth had a lot on her mind as she accepted her new calling. Although it's been more than 50 years now, her daughter Nancy still remembers the challenge her mother faced at the start of her presidency.
She was given the job of making big changes. She chose her counselors first, and she chose two people that she knew would give her different perspectives, different ideas, and that's what she wanted.
Hortense Child, Ruth's first counselor, had served on the same correlation committee as Ruth, which had discussed work intended for adult members. Ardeth Green Kapp was Ruth's second counselor and had served on a separate correlation committee focused on youth-centered works. Neither was originally from the Salt Lake area. Hortense had grown up in rural Idaho, while Ardeth was from southern Alberta, Canada. Ruth felt their experiences as members of the church outside of Utah would help give her presidency a broader view of the needs of the church wherever members lived.
Ruth herself was a formidable force. She was a gifted musician and had once had to choose between a possible career as a concert pianist or to marry and have a family. Raising 4 children kept her busy, but so did her volunteering. She had been on the Young Women General Board since the 1950s and had had many other volunteer opportunities and responsibilities. Shortly before being called as president, she taught a year of choir at East High School in Salt Lake City, where she sought out and included students other teachers considered troublemakers. But Nancy remembers her attitude and personality as being her greatest assets as a mother and disciple of Christ.
She was just very obedient and dedicated. And I think that was always a primary recognized quality that she had. And she was exhilarated by change. She liked change. My father and I and others of us kind of like things to be predictable and be able to follow a pattern, but she loved change. And she had an energetic enthusiasm. She could not sit still, I don't think, in any way. And that helped. That went along with her creative thinking. But the way she most always liked to think that the quality she thinks she'd liked to be remembered for, because she talked about it, is that she felt she had vision. And I think she was the woman for the job at the time, because she could see past the inconveniences of all the changes that were going on.
Meanwhile, outside Ruth's struggles in her calling, she was keenly aware of the tense social atmosphere and knew the young women over whom she had stewardship would be affected even more by questions about their identities and roles in life. Ruth knew, too, that the young women of her day would be the leaders of the future, and they needed to be prepared. She envisioned a radical alteration to the Personal Progress Program, which she viewed as too rigid to allow young women to develop themselves as individuals and leaders.
She was passionate about them learning not only to lead, but to even themselves set goals and seek inspiration and be committed to the scriptures.
Until that time, organization presidents typically kept that calling for many years. Ruth's predecessor, Florence Jacobson, served in that position for 11 years. Before her, Bertha Stone Reeder was a Young Women General President for 13 years. So Ruth was surprised when in 1978, just 6 years after being called as president, she was released. Many of the measures she had wanted to accomplish were left undone, and Ruth struggled with the sense of leaving so much unfinished.
Ruth had felt strongly that women needed their own meeting at General Conference or some other opportunity for the women of the church to hear directly from their leaders about their own concerns. In September 1978, the first General Women's Meeting of Conference was held. Although she had already been released, Ruth spoke at that event.
This evening, our prophet specifically speaks to us, female members of the Lord's church. But his message is for all the women of the earth who have ears to hear and hearts to understand. The one whose name this church bears has equal and unconditional love for each of his children, both those who know him and those who do not know him so well. Whatever your current situation, my beloved sisters, he reaches out to you, and so does his earthly mouthpiece. Come, let us listen to a prophet's voice. How blessed I have been to be called to serve in various general capacities these past 31 years, through and under the inspired leadership of 4 prophets, men of God's choice. But tonight, I come without the mantle of a calling or the official voice of an organization. I come as a woman, as a wife, as a mother, as a handmaiden of the Lord, but most important of all, a daughter of God and a member of his church, an identity I share with nearly all within the sound of my voice. I have pleaded with my Heavenly Father to guide me in preparing for this awesome responsibility I face. May his love make us one, though we span the globe.
For Ardeth Kapp, the release as Ruth's second counselor came with a silver lining. Her father, with whom she had a close relationship, was dying of cancer. Although being released so soon was disappointing, she was grateful for the extra time she had to spend with him in his final days. After his passing, Ardeth worked designing curriculum at Brigham Young University. Later, she was invited to partner with a businessman named Charles Hobbs to give time management and business development lectures to corporate professionals, administrators, and entrepreneurs.
In 1984, Ardeth was called as Young Women General President, much to her surprise. In the years since Ruth's presidency, the youth organizations had separated once again. Ruth's successor, Elaine Canid, had also encouraged leaders of the church to give young women a dedicated time for gospel instruction like the young men did. This happened when the combined meeting schedule was introduced in 1980. Presidents of women-led organizations now sat on the stand at General Conference, too. There had been a lot of modifications in the church over the last couple of decades, but Ardeth saw the need for a few more to help the young women find their place in the gospel, and she shared that vision with her new counselors and board.
And I said, this is a new day. This is a time when the issue of women is going abroad. We've got to have more visibility for women. And I said, we've got to have a clarification that will let us know what our specific mission is at this time. It's a critical time. It's a different time. It's a historic time, but it's got to be something different. We've got to have an identity that ties us as members of the church. When we considered the way the world was changing and the impact of the media and everything else that was coming into place, we felt that we needed a program, not just a good program like we'd had in the past, certainly, but we needed a program that was so centered and focused on the things that young women would absolutely need to know and have and understand and believe in order to prepare to face the opposition that was obviously coming forward. And so we prayed earnestly about that. And one of the first meetings, the question was obviously, well, what shall we do? And immediately a comment came up, no, not what shall we do? What do we want to have happen? Plan with a purpose. And then the next question, no, what does he want to have happen? What does our Heavenly Father want us to be working on to prepare the group of young women now for the future? We determined that there were 4 things that were absolutely critical. The first one was one of identity. Who am I in today's world? The second one was one of direction. What am I to do? And the third one, okay, but how do I do that? And the fourth one, why? What difference does it make anyway? And so that became the heart.
In 1985, Ardeth and her presidency and board introduced the Young Women Values, which gave a rainbow of colors and virtues for teenage girls to consider as they forged their identities as daughters of heavenly parents. In proposing the values to priesthood leaders, Ardeth took a different approach based on her professional experience.
In my personal life, that helped me prepare for my calling, I think came as a result of learning how to communicate in councils, in cooperation with others, so that you'd go into a meeting, and I remember we didn't go in and say, this is what we'd like your approval for. We wanted their part, but we also wanted them to put a value on our part, our perspective. And so we would say, we've studied this out. This is an area that we have some very serious interest in, and we've studied it out. We've counseled together. We've prayed about it. We've sought revelation. And this is our recommendation for your consideration, but we will await your counsel. In other words, we are saying, we've brought the best we can, but we trust in the Lord, and we understand priesthood leadership, but we also sense the responsibility of our relationship in the priesthood.
Ardeth found that approach was more successful than she'd experienced with the past. Others, though, needed more convincing, especially as leaders around the world were still trying to adjust to the changes that had come with correlation.
I remember one time when I was on an assignment in Mexico, and one of the brethren down there said to me, the church is expanding and enlarging throughout the nations of the world, and you've been asked to cut back and simplify. Why would you come up with a new program when you've been asked to cut back and simplify? And I had no way to answer that, except I was sleeping downstairs in the bedroom one night in this brother's home, and the next day I came up and I said, I have an answer to your question. And he says, well, why? And I said, well, the mission of the church, for the brother and the priesthood and all, is to proclaim the gospel, perfect the saints, redeem the dead. I said, if that's the heart of it, then why wouldn't we take the young women and make them a central part of that team that would reach beyond
what we'd do if it was just located there. So when we put in proclaim the gospel, perfect the saints, redeem the dead, it made an opening for the young women to come in with their goals. And so we became a part, not a separate organization, but a gift that was critical to the organization as a whole. So we'd all be working together at every age for the same goals. And so when we took that forward, that was when we got the confirmation that the Lord had guided and directed this effort.
Ardeth further worked for more unity by working with Primary General President Dwan Young and Relief Society General President Barbara Smith to renovate the Relief Society building to house all three organizations. Previously, the primary and young women presidencies and boards had met in offices in the church office building. President Gordon B. Hinckley, then second counselor in the first presidency, encouraged this move to greater proximity, as well as having the presidents of each organization travel together.
To Ardeth, that closeness was an outward representation of the efforts that had been started with correlation, to streamline and simplify, and for all organizations to work together for the good of all members and their needs all around the world and throughout their lives.
I think that the Spirit was working with each one of us individually, collectively. We met together with different organizations. We met together with the priesthood leaders, and we learned to pour out our hearts to one another and to listen to one another. We felt like we were there to come in with our perspective as women of God, daughters of God, honoring the role of the priesthood and understanding that very significant responsibility of administering and all of that. But we also knew that women have access to the priesthood to receive inspiration and revelation. And when we can take it forward with the Spirit that's in harmony with their spirit, then we're going to be united and move forward in ways that people will say, we've made a major change. It was putting the whole thing together so that we were marching to the same drumbeat. We're not having, this is what we're going to do when we get older, but this is what we're going to do now. They were preparing. They were marching to the same drumbeat at a little different pace. It isn't a program that you're going to outgrow. It's a program you're going to grow with.
Later in her presidency, Ardeth would work on the first iteration of For the Strength of Youth to help collect policies and advice for teenagers that had been scattered throughout conference talks and issues of the New Era magazine into one easy-to-read pamphlet. But after introducing the young women's values, she had another project to take on, finishing the overhaul of the Personal Progress program that had been started when she was a counselor to Ruth Funk. When that new program was launched in 1987, Ruth was quietly watching.
I think she would like to have been part of it. And she was really grateful that Ardeth at one time took her aside and just said, you know, Ruth, all I did was just take things out of the top drawer and we tried to make them happen. And I think Mom really appreciated that.
Ardeth was released in 1992. Over the years, she watched the programs she put in place continue to evolve as the needs of youth around the world change and become more clear. For example, in the late 1990s, the Personal Progress program was streamlined to better suit the needs of girls internationally, many of whom didn't have the same resources, such as access to temples, as those near Utah. In 2001, the phrase "strengthen home and family" was added to the Young Women motto to reflect a greater focus on family unity. In 2009, Elaine S. Dalton and her presidency added virtue to the 7 values Ardeth and her presidency introduced in 1985. In 2019, the Young Women theme was again altered, and the structure of Young Women classes was overhauled to allow wards and branches more flexibility based on how many youth of what age they had. All of it is part of the marvelous march of the gospel.
After 8 years, we were released. We had a strong feeling that while we were being released, the principles that had been put in place by inspiration and revelation were not being released. When I remember Sister Dalton called and asked me what I thought about adding virtue, I said, it'll always be better than it's ever been before. We see that nobody's job is finished, but we have to be open and be sure that we are receptive to what's coming. There have been lots of changes. Everything is moving forward for the preparation for the Lord's second coming. We're seeing adversity, but we're also seeing a rising generation filled with light and a strong influence on the world. It's just an evidence that we're not doing this alone.
Not long after her interview with us, Ardeth Kapp passed away in March 2024. You can read more about Ardeth and other saints and leaders around the world in Saints Volume 4. What are your thoughts and insights from this episode? Drop us a line at saintspodcast@churchofjesuschrist.org. Thanks for listening.